Hola, minasan! Welcome back for another round of Warhammer research. We are heading into a new channel today, Majorkill, recommended by Bolo Johnson 711. What a name! You a fan of Bloodsport? Like Bolo Young? Ah, he's pretty cool. He's pretty cool villain in many of the films there. So yeah, this one is The Warp Explained by an Australian, Warhammer 40k lore by Majorkill. Links down in the description below. I wanted to find out about the warp. This was a very good opportunity to understand how they do travel across the universe. How they wrote it out and everything, how that's explained. Very important for my novel Trucker No Bouken, because it also involves teleportation, and it's always good to understand traveling rules when it comes to something grand like crossing the universe or going into another dimension or an alternate universe and so on. You want to make sure you have your rules straightened out and very well focused. You don't want to break the rules, because then it'll drive people insane. So yeah, this is going to be excellent. The Warp Explained by an Australian. So let's not waste any time and let's get researching.
G'day guys and gal. I've really gone a bit hard on this video today, like how do you explain the one thing in Warhammer 40k that has been continually referred to as unexplainable? By being me. The warp is extremely confusing, contradictory, and reality-defying. However, it is also quite tangible to a degree and has layers and potentially even a hard-to-find limit. There are many aspects of the warp that are explainable and understandable, so it's my hope that by the end of this video, you don't see it as this big old bowl of spaghetti magic that makes no sense, but an understandable bowl of spaghetti that kind of makes sense. Before we get started, I need to ask a favor. I've been finishing off a ball-busting project for the past 7 months that is now on the cusp of finally being over. As such, you may have noticed my upload schedule go to shit, and as a consequence, sub growth has slowed, which sucks because 600k is just a flick of a dick away, and I have something big planned for when we get there. So if you've watched me a bit, maybe you've learned something or just feel pity for me as I crave those superficial internet validation points, then please consider subscribing. It's free, easy, and I always come out with something spicy whenever we hit a milestone. Sometimes too spicy, but it is what it is. Today we'll go over the warp, where it came from, what resides in it, why humanity uses it as a faster than light travel, as well as the other aspects to it, such as the deep warp. Let's get into it.
Deep warp? There's a deep warp? Is that like some kind of conspiracy?
Materium, Imperium, Ether, Sea of Souls, or literal hell. Whatever you call it, it remains the same thing.
Really? It's got multiple names?
Sea of Souls. The warp, Immaterium, Imperium, Ether, Sea of Souls, or literal hell. Whatever you.
Dang, that's a lot of names. I couldn't keep up with that. Immaterium. Hold on.
The warp, Immaterium.
Immaterium. Sorry. This is very important.
Imperium, Ether.
Athos. I'm probably misspelling all of this and mispronouncing it.
Sea of Souls, or literal hell. Whatever you call it, it remains the same thing. A
Sea of
parallel
Souls.
dimension to real space that is completely hostile to sentient flesh and blood life. If you were to step even into the shallows of the warp, you would instantly ignite in warp flame as your very being was torn apart. Also, a demon might rape you, so there's that. The best way to explain something like the warp is through analogies and metaphors, so I'll often be referring to the warp as a sort of ocean, like many characters in 40k do, as it is actually quite a solid metaphor for it. But let's start at the beginning and give us the timeline of the warp. Where did the warp come from? Well, it's not exactly stated, but the warp needs the thoughts, emotions, and dreams of sentient creatures with souls in order to exist and be active. So you could argue that the warp officially came into being the day a sentient creature took its first breath. However, as the warp is often considered timeless and eternal, which makes a lot of the lore surrounding it extremely fucking confusing and makes my job hard as hell, then you would argue it has existed since forever and has existed since forever. But that isn't a satisfying answer, so I'm gonna bugger off the timeless warp lore for a bit so I can actually explain some shit. The warp wasn't always how it is now. It used to be significantly nicer. A calm sea where souls could enjoy an afterlife and even reincarnate without being worried about dark warp entities or demons consuming their souls. The old ones are the first beings to master the warp, and they used it to become godlike. In old lore, they were the soul masters of the warp, but GW did a random cheeky retcon semi-recently that stated that Chaos has always existed and has always been the setting's antagonist, which I personally find stupid and obnoxious, but they did fight the old ones for dominion over the warp and real space. For the most part, the old ones won, containing the realms of Chaos into small pockets of the warp while locking up a shitload of demons in prison planets. By locking them up, these demons were unable to return to the warp, and since demons are shards of their chaos gods, those shards were permanently removed from said gods, thus weakening them. For millions of years, the galaxy was at peace as the old ones seeded it with life. The warp stayed pretty chill, and the Eldar rose in power and created their own gods, who kept the warp even more secure as they resided in it. As a part of their mastery over the warp, the Old Ones even created the Webway, a multi-branch tunnel that cut through the warp and allowed them and their minions extremely fast, safe, and reliable travel through the warp, as opposed to the more risky warp jumps, in which a ship had to go balls deep into the warp with nothing but a psychic shield keeping them safe from the warp predators. Yes, even then there was warp predators, just like how sharks have almost always been in the ocean. Then the War in Heaven occurred, where the Necrons and the Catan fought against the Old Ones, Eldar, Orcs, and others. The war sucked mega dick for everyone, and the only true winners were the Chaos Gods, since the Catan and the Old Ones were both knocked out of action, the only two things that could truly threaten chaos. The Necrons went into hibernation, and the Eldar rose to dominate the galaxy. This had greatly upset the balance of the warp. All the suffering and death that occurred during the War in Heaven was reflected within the warp, turning massive swathes of it into churning hostile places. The warp got so upset by the war that it even shat out a huge amount of enslaver creatures, horrific bug-like warp entities that targeted psykers and killed them in horrific ways. However, despite all this, the Eldar still survived and rose up, using their webway to keep safe from the now hostile warp. Their gods also still existed and were mighty, thus kept the Chaos Realms in check. They also allowed the Eldar to continue to reincarnate, thus they were basically immortal. The Eldar's reign would last almost 60 million years before their arrogance and boredom would eventually cause them to murder fuck Slaanesh into existence, the process of which filled the entire warp with warp storms and fucked up humanity's new empire, as the warp storms prevented any form of warp travel. However, when Slaanesh was finally born, the Eldar gods were slain or scattered, 95% or more of the Eldar were killed, and the warp became even more of a shithole, as the Eye of Terror was torn back open. However, the psychic shockwave of Slaanesh's birth blew out most of the warp storms and allowed the Emperor to finally enact his plan.
Wow, he's going real fast here. Oh man, my brain can't process what he's saying. He's talking too fast here. He's moving too quick. Oh dang. So basically, the Elrons created. Let's see. So first it started off as a peaceful place. Souls were at peace and everything. Then suddenly, one of these gods popped up, or formed, and basically started devolving the warp into slowly but surely into a hellhole. And more demons started happening. And the Elrons, who were retconned apparently, created the Wetway to act as a way of safe travel, so they wouldn't get eaten up by shark-like creatures. While the other method, which is the dangerous method, is the psychic shield, which could probably break or break down or get messed up, and then you get attacked. It's a very hostile space. It's like an ocean. You could end up getting burned to death. And the warp was created when the first life, on the first breath of life itself, like whatever was the first instance of life, that was when the warp was created. I hope I got that. I mean, he just went through half of that so quickly. Wow. I probably may have to do more research into the warp here on this one, guys. Oh, man. And then there's a deep warp. Sounds like it's a deep state conspiracy or something. What's that about? What's that about?
The time of the Elder was over, the time of man had begun. Mankind was significantly less adept at using the warp than the Eldar. Whilst the Elder could go through tubes and passageways through the ocean via their webway, mankind had to jump in a submarine and fucking raw dog that shit. By tearing open a rent in real space, diving directly into the warp, and then following the Astronomicon, a human ship could cut a multi-light-year journey down to weeks. All they needed was a warp drive to get into the warp, a Geller field to prevent the warp from getting into them, and a navigator who could use their third eye to follow the correct paths.
Wow, that's a lot.
This sounds, and despite many ships being lost in the warp, it was actually pretty safe, with the success rate being super high. The Emperor carried the team hard here by building a psychic lighthouse and using his power to light it up. That was the Astronomicon. Thus, navigators had a reference point they could use to know where they were at all times. Now that basically sums up the warp's timeline and how the Elder and humanity use it for faster than light travel, but it doesn't yet answer much about the nature of the warp. Fortunately, in the Horus Heresy novel, The Path of Heaven, great book by the way, we get a mega nerd who is obsessed with the warp give us a seriously deep insight into it. He basically says that the warp is like an onion. It has layers, with the deepest layers being so out of reach and hardcore that they are impossible to reach, and even the gods don't go down there. He explicitly refers to the warp as an ocean that has currents, depths, storms, and predators. However, the sharks don't swim at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. In terms of its depths, there is the shallows, which is what mankind cuts through when they enter the warp.
It's like the Mariana Trench.
Skim along its surface, which is why the Chaos gods don't just eat our ass whenever we warp jump. They are deeper than that. Then there is the middle depth, the greater arteries, which are very hard to get to, and which is where a lot of the hectic shit resides, like the realms of chaos and the chaos gods themselves. Then there is the deep warp, the root of terror, which is considered to basically be impossible to access as even the gods don't go down there. You know the Well of Eternity, that warp anomaly that Titsnitch was too scared to go into, so he kept throwing his greater demons in until Kairos eventually returned, now with an extra head and a lot more insanity? That well probably was a direct route to the deep warp. Now, of course, the Emperor tried to access the deep warp, that cheeky man, and to be fair, it does sort of make sense. It's a section of the warp where chaos doesn't touch, so theoretically could be a great way to travel. He did this by finding a Xeno version of the Golden Throne somewhere in space called Dark Glass. He planned to sync up Dark Glass to the Golden Throne to create a permanent stable pathway between the two locations as a part of his Webway project. But it's also insinuated that this portal wouldn't be via the Webway, but via the deep warp. Jagadai actually went through the Dark Glass portal after his chief librarian and one of the strongest psychics to ever exist, Tagata Yasugai, sacrificed his very essence upon the Dark Glass throne to open up the portal. The White Scars then rapidly journeyed through to Terra without issue, an extremely easy ride through the warp. Now, it's not entirely clear if this was via the Webway or the Deep Warp, but with the Deep Warp being discussed so much in the book, I like to think they went in deep. But if I'm wrong, then comment below and I'll love heart it. Don't want to be spreading that misinformation, you know. Now for the elephant in the room, the realms of chaos. Where are these and how do they fit into the bigger picture?
The chaos?
Infinite, at least not if we're being direct. By using it as a shortcut through real space, it has to have a degree of distance and space in it. Since it also relies on sentience to be active, you cannot warp jump from one galaxy to another, as there is too much dead space in between the two, it wouldn't be active. Other warp events, like the Ruin Storm, had a specific amount of mass and area. If the warp was infinite, yet the Ruin Storm isn't, then ships simply could have flown around it. As such, we also know that the realms of chaos aren't these infinite things either. There is a limited amount of demons in Warhammer. It's a fucking high number, but it's limited. You cannot have an infinite chaos realm with finite demons. The Chaos Realms are also quite physical and tangible. People have travelled there before and seen it. Farseers went to Nurgle's Garden and burnt some of it. Kaldor Drago wanders the realms and breaks shit all the time.
Wow, so that's the Chaos Realms?
Through each of Slanesh's
Yo, what a map! Yo, this is the Chaos Realm? This is one heck of a map. And so people have visited this. The Slaanesh marches. I'm gonna need to look at Slaanesh. Okay, Chaos Realms. Wow. The Eternal Swamps, Land of the Plague Lord, the Ninth Library, the Bastion Stain? Or the Bastion Slain. Grove of Dark Maiden, Palace of Slaanesh. So this is the Six Circles of Seduction. So this is our territory? Or am I looking at different parts of the okay, so then the Dark Prince's Realm, Land of the Plague Lord, the Obsidian Council. So, okay, it's so on one side here would be Slaanesh's, and the other side would be like someone else's territory. It's not just that. All of this is not just this whole entire thing is not her territory. It's she's got this territory here where it says Palace of Slaanesh and all these words here. What the heck is those words? The Six Circles of Seduction. There we go. Okay, the Six Circles of Seduction in the Palace of Slaanesh is her territory, but the Obsidian Council, the Ninth Library, is someone else's territory, another god's territory, and the Mansion of the Plague Lord belongs to the Plague Lord, if I'm understanding this correct. Later, the 13th Lord. This is amazing, and this is a world within a world. This is crazy. This is a world within a world here. Wow. Oh my gosh, this is impressive. And people have gone here. Wow. So this was when so this whole thing came out of it because of Slaanesh. as spoken about earlier in the video, where Slanesh popped in, everybody was doing all shenanigans with Slanesh, and then this ended up happening in the end when other guards started showing up. Veil of Creatures. Wow, man, Mansion, the Abysmal Sump? The heck is a sump? The Sixth Circle of Seduction is hilarious. And the Causeway of Secrets. The names is so cool. The Drifting Castle should have been in the classroom. Island of Lepers. Ooh. The Vermilion Caverns. I really love the names of these. The Ossified Hills. Wormid Reaches. This is some excellent names for locations. Oh, wow. Very inspiring.
Temptation, so they are actually tangible things. Thus, the realms of chaos only make up.
Oh, that's hardcore. The Wrath Gate.
Warp, which is why no one accidentally goes through via a warp jump, since warp jumps are just shallow jumps. However, you can warp jump into the middle layer of the warp and into the realms of chaos. When Mortarion was tricked by Typhus into killing his own navigators, Typhus used Nurgle's power to warp jump them into the realm of Nurgle, which then forced Morty to ascend to become a demon prince while his Death Guard mutated into the Plague Marines. This mid-layer of the warp is also home to the Formless Wastes, the areas of the middle warp not controlled by the Chaos Gods. This also includes the Forge of Souls, as well as numerous pocket dimensions created by demon princes or powerful psykers. It's very possible that the Lion's Forest Walk ability allows him to travel through the middle warp, which is also why the Chaos Gods are able to manifest in his forest as well. I referred to the timelessness of the warp before, which is something about the warp I actually find kind of shit lore-wise. Basically, the warp and everything in it always was, if it was to ever be. So for example, even though Slanesh was born around the 30k mark, her demons were present 60 million years ago because of warp timelessness. So as she existed in 30k, so she always did. In a more day-to-day example, you could warp jump and actually come out of the warp earlier than when you went into it, or you could come out 100 years later, despite only, let's say, spending 2 weeks in the warp. However, that is pretty rare. Generally, it's actually close to 1-to-1 timing, otherwise the setting would be absolutely cooked. Basically, whatever the writers want to happen, happens, with them just shrugging and saying the warp is cooked and mysterious, don't worry about it. So in summary, the warp is a multi-layered, hateful place full of malicious bastards. However, it's only bad because of all the shit happening.
Everything is bad in Warhammer.
Fighting and sung Kumbaya, then chaos would be fucked and the warp would calm down. However, this is also the reason why chaos is constantly causing issues. If it leaves real space alone, eventually there would be peace and the end of chaos. This was kind of the Emperor's goal. By making the human webway, mankind would no longer need to travel through the warp and chaos. Ah, well, wouldn't be a very fun setting if it was the Sea of Chilling where people could hang out and drink pina coladas. If you enjoyed the video and you want to support the channel, then subscribe. I mean, I literally just...
Okay, that was too fast. He talked way too fast. I barely could keep up. That was a lot of information. I think a 30-minute video is more appropriate for my pacing. It's not a bad video. It's a nice chock full of information. The artwork. I love the map. Oh gosh, the map is beautiful. That was such a beautiful map. I gotta do some map making myself for my own world, but holy mackerel, that was there was a lot more to the warp than I actually imagined and anticipated. It's got one heck of a deep history. I mean, this ain't just no lore, ordinary lore. This thing's got history. You know, this a whole. Wow, and who documented all of that is amazing. You know, in universe, who in universe, like what character, what doctor, what archaeologist, what professor in universe was able to document all that? Because apparently, warp will destroy you if you're not properly prepared for entering that area. You'll just like flames. And if you do somehow manage to survive, then you got to deal with the demons that's living in there, who can do horrific things to you. Very horrific things to you. Oh my gosh, man. Apparently, the Elrons got retcon, and I think that's a big issue for someone like me. Learning the warp for the first time. I'm gonna need help, dear commenters below, on that one, just to make sure it's very clear that I have the up-to-date information. Any recommended videos with up-to-date info on the warp will be very good. This is something I'm going to want a little more info on, do a little bit more research into, because that's like, you know, it's like a whole world unto itself, and it's got areas, lots of areas, and the gods are playing a very very big role in the whole of the universe. I should get into some videos to learn what the gods are and understand them. Try and get to learn who they are, including Mork and Gork, including Mork and Gork. Yeah, let's see here. Calm sea, hostile space. They got the humans have the Astronomicon, which acts like a psychic lighthouse to guide them through the warp. I hope I understood that correctly. The Emperor of Earth is trying or tried to create a wetway for humankind, which would give them a great advantage in the universe without having to go through the chaos of hell itself, where they're getting nuked and destroyed and everything in between. Apparently, the warp is like onions. There's so many layers, and the further down you go, not even the gods themselves will go down there, which I would like to know if there's a story on that one. Like, is Game Workshop and their lore masters not answering that question and just leaving it mysterious all the way through? Or did they actually go down in there and actually showed us what's in those lower levels? That would be fascinating if they did write that out. If they didn't, that's perfectly good. You know, that's perfectly fine. You know, some mysteries should stay a mystery in your story, in your storytelling, to make it more fascinating and make the world more fleshed out and three-dimensional in that sense. Let's see here. Yeah, they tried to. I think if I remember, if I understood correctly, humans were trying to connect the dark glass to the golden throne to help out with their warping abilities. This map is epic. Okay, this map is epic. I love it. I love it. Look at this. Some of these heavy metal names. The Blood God's Domain. That's a heavy metal name, right? If I ever heard one. Yeah, coming up on the stage, it's the Blood God's Domain. And then they're like, the Impossible Fortress, the Black Pit. The names are epic. The Tree of Souls, the Shattered Causeway, the Cracked Land, the Slayer Forge. These are some excellent names. The Wrathgate. Now that's a metal name if I ever heard one. The Wrathgate. Now, there's got to be a band called that. Oh my gosh, the Bad Moon. I like this. I like this. I like this. This is very inspirational. This map. I definitely want to draw one myself for my worlds. That'll be great. That'll be great. So yeah. Yeah, it's still good. It's still good for what it did. But I definitely gonna need to find slower videos because there's a lot to this warp, and I feel like I'm missing out more than I could imagine. So no biggie, no biggie. Head on over to Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com and grab yourself a copy of The Impossible Man, a strange fantasy novel written by me. You'll find links to the merch down below, along with links to other merch such as pins, stickers, t-shirts, music. Enjoy the products. Thank you for your patronage. And if you're interested, you can join me on my live multi-stream every Monday through Thursday, 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where I do research, Japanese studies, language study nights, and plenty of video games if you're interested. So, with that said, until the next research, Warhammer research, thank you all for joining me, and I wish you all a good night, a buenas noches, and oyasumi nasai.